Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about a word that gets thrown around a lot when it comes to men who've taken care of themselves. Intimidating. You hear it when a man is older, disciplined, fit, carries himself with quiet confidence, and doesn't bend to chaos. Suddenly he's intimidating. But here's the truth: when people say a fit, older man is intimidating, it's rarely about the man himself. It's about the way his presence forces others to confront something internal, an insecurity, an unmade decision, a lack of discipline, or a path they didn't take. The word becomes a convenient label, a socially acceptable way to express discomfort without admitting vulnerability. It's far easier to place the cause outside oneself, onto the man in front of them, than to acknowledge the real source of tension happening inside. Calling someone intimidating shifts responsibility. It removes the need for introspection. Instead of saying, "I feel inadequate," "I'm not where I want to be," or "I'm not confident around this type of man," the word intimidating does the emotional heavy lifting. It blames the man's presence rather than one's own internal state. A fit older man often embodies traits that are earned through years of discipline, physical strength, control over his emotions, financial stability, and the quiet confidence that comes from overcoming personal struggles. To someone who hasn't invested in themselves, that combination can feel like judgment even when no judgment is being made. The man isn't attacking, criticizing, or boosting. He's simply existing. But his existence alone becomes a spotlight others feel exposed under. It's the same reason people feel uncomfortable around someone who is extremely organized when their own life is chaotic, or someone who is calm when they are consumed by anxiety. The contrast creates a psychological pressure, and pressure often disguises itself as fear or intimidation. The truth is, most fit older men are not trying to intimidate anyone. They're not puffing their chest out or seeking to overpower others. In fact, many have intentionally chosen a stoic path because it keeps them grounded, balanced, and unfazed by external noise. They've learned to master themselves, not to control other people. But self-mastery is rare, and rarity often appears threatening. When someone has spent years chasing validation or reacting emotionally, meeting a man who doesn't play those games can be deeply unsettling. It challenges the emotional habits they've built, and people naturally resist what destabilizes their comfort. The word intimidating also functions as a shield. It protects the speaker from having to admit admiration or attraction. It's safer to say, "You intimidate me," than to say, "I'm drawn to the strength and stability you represent, and I'm not sure I measure up." People use the word to maintain emotional distance without exposing their true feelings. It's a defense mechanism disguised as an observation. But underneath the surface, there's often respect, curiosity, or even desire mixed with fear. At the core of this dynamic is a simple reality: self-improvement creates contrast, and contrast creates reactions. A man who has taken care of his body, mind, and life amplifies the areas where others have neglected themselves. That discomfort is an invitation to grow, but most people experience it as intimidation because change feels risky. So the label becomes a way to avoid the deeper truth. The man isn't intimidating, they're intimidated. A self-made man becomes a mirror whether he intends to or not. His discipline, resilience, and consistency reflect back the choices others have made, or avoided. When someone encounters a man who has built himself physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially, they're not just meeting a person, they're meeting the sum of years of deliberate decisions. That reflection can be motivating for some, but for many, it feels uncomfortable. It highlights the gap between who they are and who they could be if they had held themselves to the same standards. People don't like seeing the distance between their intentions and their actions, so instead of confronting that gap, they project their discomfort onto the man who exposes it. A fit older man represents time well spent. He shows what happens when someone refuses to let excuses dictate their life. While others coasted, procrastinated, or prioritized comfort, he chose effort, structure, and purpose. When people see the results of his choices, strength, confidence, calmness, they're forced to acknowledge their own. Even if they never speak it out loud, the comparison forms instantly. It's human nature. We measure ourselves against others to understand where we stand. And if someone has spent years avoiding responsibility, the presence of someone who embraced it serves as an uncomfortable reminder. The mirror doesn't lie, it simply shows what's there. This reflection isn't about superiority or arrogance. The disciplined man is not trying to make others feel lesser. His achievements are not weapons. He isn't flaunting anything. But the contrast is undeniable. A man who has invested in his health will reveal the neglect in someone who hasn't. A man who controls his emotions will reveal the chaos in someone who lets impulses dictate their life. A man who has built financial stability will reveal the financial recklessness in someone who avoided planning. These contrasts force people to reckon with themselves, and when they are unwilling to do that, they interpret the presence of such a man as pressure. The mirror effect also explains why admiration and resentment often coexist. Many people are drawn to what they lack. They admire the discipline, the confidence, the maturity. Yet at the same time, They resent the reminder that they could have developed those same qualities if they had chosen differently. This emotional tension is rarely expressed directly. Instead, it's disguised through labels like intimidating, too serious, or too intense. It's easier to criticize the reflection than to analyze oneself. For women, the mirror effect carries another layer. A fit older man often embodies a level of grounded masculine energy that is increasingly rare. His combination of experience and self-control contrasts sharply with men who never matured past adolescent habits or who lack direction. This contrast isn't threatening because he's aggressive. It's threatening because he doesn't need validation. He doesn't chase. He doesn't cling. He doesn't bend his standards. His stability exposes emotional instability in others, and his boundaries highlight where others lack them. Ultimately, this mirror effect reveals something important: people react not to who you are, but to what you represent. A self-made man represents accountability. He represents the payoff of discipline. He represents what is possible when excuses are abandoned. And when someone is not ready to face themselves, the mirror becomes a source of discomfort rather than inspiration. When someone describes a fit older man as intimidating, what they often mean is that they can't influence him in the ways they're used to influencing others. Control, whether emotional, social, or psychological, is a subtle currency in most human interactions. People grow accustomed to reading cues, playing to weaknesses, or using charm to shift dynamics in their favor. But when they encounter a man who is self-contained, disciplined, and not easily swayed, that dynamic breaks down. The sense of predictability they rely on evaporates. They can't move him, can't manipulate him, can't destabilize him. That inability creates discomfort, and discomfort quickly gets translated into the simpler word, intimidation. This reaction stems from the fact that such a man is immune to many of the usual methods people use to get their way. He's not controlled by his emotions, so provoking him doesn't work. He's not hungry for external validation, so flattery or attention-seeking behavior falls flat. He's not insecure about his age, status, or appearance, so nothing can be weaponized against him there. When someone tries to push buttons that aren't there, they feel powerless. And people rarely admit to feeling powerless. Instead, they label the other person as intimidating to avoid confronting the fact that their usual strategies have failed. A fit older man's boundaries are another source of perceived intimidation. Clear boundaries are uncommon, and uncommon things turn into obstacles for those who aren't used to respecting limits. When someone is used to easy access, emotional volatility, or bending others to suit their needs, encountering a man with firm self-respect feels like hitting a wall. He won't entertain drama. He won't tolerate manipulation. He won't rearrange his life for someone who hasn't earned a place in it. This firmness isn't aggression, it's clarity. But clarity looks like confrontation to those who rely on chaos and flexibility to maintain control in relationships. There's also the element of independence. A man who takes care of himself physically and mentally gives off an unmistakable signal: he doesn't need anyone. He may want people in his life, but he isn't dependent on them. That distinction is critical. When someone senses that they can't leverage dependency, emotional, financial, or social, they feel unequipped. They can't pull him in with neediness, guilt, or demands. He's content standing alone, and that makes him harder to manipulate. People who rely on others' insecurities find themselves with no leverage at all. Furthermore, the calm confidence that comes with age and discipline disrupts the emotional rhythm many people expect. They're used to men who react quickly, who try to impress, who get flustered or defensive. But a man who remains centered throws off the script. He doesn't play along with emotional games or fall into predictable patterns. His steadiness forces others to face themselves instead of distracting them from their own flaws. That loss of emotional control creates a sense of vulnerability, which gets misinterpreted as intimidation. It's not that he's threatening, it's that he's unaffected. In the end, when people say a man like this is intimidating, what they often mean is that he stands outside their influence. They can't manipulate his emotions, can't destabilize his confidence, and can't control his time or attention. That level of autonomy is rare, and rarity always challenges those who depend on predictable responses from others. So instead of saying, "I can't sway you," they reach for a word that protects their ego. Intimidating. Stoic masculinity has a presence that doesn't need volume, theatrics, or attention, and that alone can create discomfort in others. A fit older man who has learned to master his reactions carries himself with a calm steadiness that is becoming increasingly uncommon. In a world where people are constantly pulled by impulses, distractions, and emotional turbulence, encountering someone who has cultivated inner order feels almost foreign. His grounded energy stands out, not because he's trying to impose himself, but because so few people live that way anymore. This rarity is what people translate into intimidation. When something is unfamiliar, especially something powerful yet quiet, it naturally feels overwhelming. Such a man radiates a sense of self that is both strong and understated. He doesn't need to announce his achievements or explain himself, because his body language, discipline, and emotional control speak on his behalf. The more society normalizes insecurity, inconsistency, and emotional volatility, the more a man who is the opposite becomes a striking contrast. His presence challenges people simply by existing. They feel the difference immediately: the way he stands, the way he listens, the way he doesn't react out of weakness or ego. He carries an internal stability that can't be faked or borrowed. It can only be earned, and when something is earned instead of performed, others sense it instinctively. This sense of presence also reveals the superficiality in others. People who rely on noise, charm, or emotional theatrics find themselves disarmed when they encounter someone who isn't moved by any of it. The Stoic man doesn't chase validation, and that absence of neediness shifts the power dynamic. He's not trying to impress anyone. He's not trying to win anyone over. He simply lives according to his principles, and that level of independence creates a gravitational pull. But it also exposes the lack of grounding in others. They realize how much they depend on external approval or emotional reactions, and the contrast stings. Another element that contributes to the perception of intimidation is the sense of maturity that comes from age and experience. Younger men often compensate for insecurity by being loud or overly assertive, but an older man who has refined himself no longer needs that display. His strength is subtle. Others feel it not because he exerts it, but because it's embedded in who he is. He reacts slowly, speaks selectively, and listens with intention. This control over his emotional and physical expression creates a sense of unpredictability. For those who expect drama or quick reactions, when someone can't provoke or sway him, they don't know how to interpret him, and confusion often gets mislabeled as fear. The Stoic man also represents a type of masculinity that emphasizes self-governance rather than dominance. He doesn't impose his will on others, but he refuses to allow others to impose theirs on him. This balance of restraint and strength creates an aura that others can't easily decode. They sense the discipline behind his silence, the power behind his calmness, the intention behind his actions. That subtle depth is intimidating to people who are used to surface-level behavior. It requires them to bring their best self forward, and not everyone is prepared for that challenge. So instead of acknowledging that discomfort, they project it onto the man and call him intimidating. A man who has put in the work, physically, mentally, and emotionally, should never feel pressured to shrink himself to ease someone else's insecurities. Yet this is exactly what many people expect when they describe a strong, disciplined older man as intimidating. The unspoken suggestion is that he should soften his presence, lower his standards, or make himself more approachable so others won't feel uncomfortable. But true growth never comes from diminishing oneself. It comes from holding firm, standing tall, and maintaining the level of excellence that was earned through years of effort. When a man chooses to delude himself for others, he's not being kind, he's abandoning the very principles that shaped him. People often project their discomfort onto someone who has chosen a higher path. They want the man to dim his strength because it exposes their weaknesses. They want him to be less disciplined so they don't feel guilty about their own lack of discipline. They want him to loosen his standards so they don't have to rise to them. In many ways, asking a man to not be so intimidating is really a plea for him to stop being a reminder of what others could be if they put in the same work. But it is not a man's responsibility to make others comfortable. Comfort is not a gift he owes anyone, and it certainly shouldn't come at the cost of his identity or achievements. A man who refuses to shrink sends a powerful message, one that some admire and others resent. He communicates, without speaking, that self-respect comes first, that he values the journey he has taken too much to undo it for the sake of fitting into someone else's comfort zone. The more he stands firm, the more he gives silent permission for others to rise as well. Strength inspires strength. Discipline inspires discipline. Shrinking, however, inspires nothing. If anything, it teaches people that their insecurities have power over others. It teaches them that all they need to do is feel uncomfortable, and strong men will bend. Maintaining one's size, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, is a form of leadership. It challenges others to face themselves instead of adjusting the world around them. This doesn't mean being arrogant or confrontational. It means staying true to the version of yourself you worked hard to build. A fit older man who has endured hardships, developed maturity, and cultivated stability carries a presence that has been earned. Softening that presence doesn't help anyone. It removes the very qualities that make him valuable, to himself and to the people capable of appreciating him. Standing tall ultimately filters the world around him. People who see his strength as a threat will peel away, while those who see it as direction will step closer. Either outcome benefits him, because it ensures he surrounds himself with people who align with his values rather than demand his compromise. When he refuses to shrink, he's not just protecting his identity, he's setting a standard. A standard that real connection comes from meeting a man where he is, not from pulling him down to ease someone else's fears. So keep training, keep reading, keep building, keep becoming the man your younger self needed, and your older self will respect. Because the world doesn't need more men who shrink. It needs more men who stand tall, silently, intentionally, and let their presence speak louder than any explanation ever could. Thank you.